Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, 3 Key Steps to Aligning Business Processes with Your Digital Transformation Journey, presented by Aragon Research and Timeline PI. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Jim Sinur joined Aragon Research in 2016 as a Vice President and Research Fellow. As a distinguished thought leader, he covers digital transformation, the digital business platform, the Internet of Things, cognitive delivery, and the intelligent workplace. Scott Opitz is a 30-year veteran of the computer industry and has founded and built companies in the application integration, business process management, and business intelligence spaces. In 2014, he founded Timeline PI and serves as its president and CEO. Alex Deibler has spent 10-plus years occupying many different roles within enterprise software, and most recently focusing on data analysis and process intelligence. So I'll now turn things over to our first speaker, Jim Sinur.
We are in this phase of doing digital. In fact, what we're finding is 80% of our customer base is doing digital now. Now, 20% of them are just in the planning stage, but 60% are active. And the most productive areas that we see are around business process. So I'd like to give you quickly the 3 areas that we see business process working and interacting with digital very well. One is new business opportunities, the other is customer loyalty, and the other is better business results. So traditionally, process has been very helpful in efficiency and optimization, and that, while that still continues, we're seeing it expand into customer loyalty and new services. To give a context of what we're going to talk about today, this is the digital business platform that has 5 major areas of activity that surround the continuous stream of emerging technologies. Going clockwise, there's process case management, there's AI and algorithms, which we call cognition and calculations, data, big data, fast development, low code, IoT, machine and sensors, and then business applications in various levels of granularity. But we're going to focus in on the red circle, which is the process and basically AI and algorithms. So process really does help with new business opportunities. We've seen companies like Amazon take a process model and just drive that process model to win more and more of the retail. I mean, the reason I was attracted to Amazon as a customer is their process model is better than anybody's. Yeah, well, they did suggest through their algorithms what I should buy. Most of it I ignored. I just bought what I wanted to. But their process model works smooth. I know where everything is. I have visibility. They deliver on time. That's all good. We've seen, companies like Tesla. Uber's, uses a process model. Well, they're running into some difficulties that they're trying to turn into a traditional kind of company. We see new products and new services. Now you can buy things off your cell phone very quickly. I've done a number of my Christmas shopping that way, and I'm seeing new products and services that I haven't seen before, and a lot of them are process driven. You see that particularly in retail, but I'm going to give you some ideas of where we see it in other industries. So here's an example of using the digital business platform as a way of showing you what's happening. This was started off as a process kind of thing where doctors were assisting with rounds and leveraging patient history and notes, where the doctor would go around and with some kind of handheld would take notes and update the history, and all of the nurses' comments, everybody's comments were included. It's on one workbench or workplace, and it included test results, and they could order prescriptions right from the bedside. And they were getting much better healing, faster healing by using this kind of capability. And as time moved on, they started in the inclusion of real-time patient data. They could basically keep track of what's happening in real time, and they added more medical advice components as time went on, so they could use medical experts, and they could go out and read different kinds of medical writings. So this made the round and used more of the digital business platform. So you can see that you can create new and better services that are much more human-friendly. Which brings us to the next point. Processes can deliver customer loyalty. People today are not as loyal as they used to be, and so it's a rare commodity to keep a customer for life. And we've got new generations that have different expectations. They want to be entertained, they want to be delighted. They can easily shift from one organization to the other. So we're seeing a new emphasis on customer journey mapping, and this mapping works two ways. One is drawings, and the other is real live data that's mined, brought together. Also customer customization, we're seeing that in a number of processes, and increased employee partner support, and we see that through the notion of personas and workbenches, and the example of the doctor's workbench for making rounds is an example of that, and of course the doctors and the nurses, loved it. So, the purpose of a company is to create and keep a customer. It costs 4 to 10 times the price to acquire a customer than does keeping an existing one. So we've known that. I've been reading Fortune and Forbes and all the business magazines. This is like duh, and so what we need to do is keep our processes sharp so that we can keep our customers for a longer time. Now, if you take a look at this chart, this shows the story. On the right side is, operational performance, and at the bottom, value to the organization. If you take a look at our traditional processes and apps, they're all about value to the organization and operational efficiency. If you take a look at some of the new business models that come out of Amazon, Tesla, Uber, GE, this is using processes to gain competitive advantages. What we see is, and what they're doing is they're coming at it from a strategic viewpoint and value to the customer. What we see settling in is the new digital processes, which will leverage some of the old and eventually grow to some competitive advantage, finds the sweet spot between value to the customer and value to the organization, and balances between strategic and operational. And what you're going to see today is an example of a vendor that can help you do that. So we know the customer is king. We know they want fast turnaround. We know they want to know that you care about them, that you're just not a number anymore. We've got a ways to go on that, but journey mapping is one of the key ways. The past methods aren't acceptable. Voice response is unsatisfactory. Faulty constructed surveys that are made to make the middle manager get his or her bonus. You can't just give yourself a facelift and say, oh, well, we work for many channels, let's sit back and relax. Those days are gone. It's time to change the engagement experience and to gather expectations, identify the touch points, and understand what's going on at those touch points, find the pain and figure out a way to eliminate it, and analyze the customer journey as it really is, not how you want it. So you may say, well, this, you may have to model it the first time to say this is what we think it is. Go get the data to find out what it really is, and then find opportunities to surpass expectations. So we see that organizations that are doing that are finding a balance, and we've got ratings of digital business platforms and customer journey mapping tools at Aragon. So we also need some kind of context, because if you do an individual journey, that doesn't give the full context. What you need is the customer life cycle and all the touch points that they're involved in. So it's not just an individual journey, it's part of a journey architecture. There are 7 key requirements that we've identified for customer journey mapping technologies. Ability to create maps, well, that's not a big surprise. But being able to collaborate worldwide on those maps, being able to capture emotions, and whether people are bored or engaged, capturing data and mining it, adding analytical capabilities and advanced visualization, those are all great capabilities to keep your journey sharp. Security and administration, we have to say that. It's there. We got to deal with it. We don't want other people to get a hold of it. So the real fine balance here is to have machine mind inputs and humans working together. And it's very important when humans are involved that you gather the right thing, whether it's the worker, the supplier in the value chain, or the end customer themselves. You need input from experts, focal groups, social inputs, customer surveys that are really constructed in a good way, and management goals, which of course shift, and the balance of those goals shift. And combined with the machine inputs, process maps, spreadsheets, system feeds, logs, click streams, those are all very important. Also, capturing the emotional pain points, how people feel, how they're engaged, look at the highlights of those touch points, and work on personas. Now, this is the one we probably all are good at, but we can all get better, or we at least think we're good at, is using processes to deliver better results, business effectiveness, process efficiency, and a new area that's always kind of been there, but we haven't been able to spend a lot of time on it, is optimized resources. Are you getting the most out of your resources, and do you have the right balance between people and machines? We're going to see that this is going to get a lot of focus as we start including RPA bots, AI, generalized robots, specific robots, software bots, bot farms. Keeping a dynamic, optimal balance of what you should be doing when is going to be a huge challenge. So in digital, it used to be you'd have one kind of style of process, usually happy path, structured, simple. Well, the whole world doesn't work that way, and there are more exceptions than happy paths. And even if that's not the case, the exceptions are very difficult to deal with, and that's where you can differentiate yourself. And eventually you'll have emergent kinds of processes where you don't have a plan for it, and it happens dynamically. So the higher the emergence, the higher the differentiation for an organization, and it's a mix of new and legacy. There are many more resources to manage. There are a lot that are below the waterline that are, bots and drones, robots, etc. But it's the people. Combine the customers with the knowledge workers, with the managers, with the actual workers, keeping them in tune in real time and optimized to the point, by the minute, by the second, is going to be the challenge of all of us going forward. We believe that digital demands faster sources of data, not just big data, but fast data. And we have to be mining these in real time as we go forward. Digital is now. Also, digital begs for multiple data overlays so we can see what's really going on. Boy, I used to be a heavy-duty biker. Now I'm just heavy-duty. Probably need to get back on that bike. If I had something like this in my visor, showing me where I was, what, how many calories I'm burning, what kind of actions going on as I go up the hill, and someday maybe I'll have some embedded nanotechnology that says what's happening to my internal system as I'm going up this hill. These data overlays, timelines particularly, and you're going to hear a lot about that today. Benchmarks, prioritizations, images, notations, life cycles, heat maps, statistics. I mean, everything's in the green here, so this guy's going up the hill following his partner, and everything's going good. Now that I'm getting older, there'll be more caution and red on mine. So digital also creates an opportunity for AI and analytical capabilities like never before. And analytical used to be, looking through the rearview mirrors. Now, not only will it be going real time, it'll be predictive, looking ahead of time, running things like machine learning to tweak your rules, to tweak your algorithms, deep learning so that it works more like your mind, cognitive, which has a combinations of heuristics and deep learning. Simulation, there's companies that are simulating what happens if we're in a hospital and a storm hits one of our network hospitals. How do we get everybody out into a different location? Delta comparisons, segmentations, roll-ups, roll-downs. The notion of applying analytics for keeping this all fine-tuned and running. So not only are companies going to get advantages by having better services and better customer loyalty, operations, keeping them honed is going to hit a new peak. And today you're going to find out about some more of that. So if we take a look at the digital business platform and all of the on-ramps, we think that the process and analytical on-ramps are the hot ones today. We hear a lot about emerging technologies, things like nano, blockchain, 3D printed, virtual immersion, wearables, etc. That's not digital completely. I mean, obviously those things are going to help. But if you take a look, we have some great opportunities with, microservices, APIs, bots, RPA, analytics, machine learning, and, a lot of work flowing within persona-based environments. So as we move forward, the digital business platform will use more of it. We think some of the better on-ramps are around process. And here's why. We think that the process on-ramps deliver some of the highest benefits at the lowest cost using the most common skills. You don't need a lot of exotic skills to make this work. They have generally the shortest time to benefits, the lowest level of experimentation, and the lowest level of difficulty. So in that light, Aragon has identified 32 on-ramps that you can take a look at to start your digital. I'll admit analysts aren't supposed to have biases, but I do have a bias towards process and analytics because that's where I came from. I started BPM service for a former competitor. Also, we've identified 10 foolproof mini journeys. If you think about digital, it's a lot like ascending a mountain. You're going to try to go to base camp 1 and you're going to learn all kinds of techniques for climbing, for moving forward. You'll be practicing your breathing. That's a lot like digital. It's like scaling a mountain. You're going to have several base camps before you get to the peak. And then you're going to want to climb another mountain. So we think process is a great place to start. We think also through exercising processes, it's going to develop and help you discover innovation capabilities. Compelling customer journeys is at the center of it all. Digital puts pressure for enterprises to innovate on their existing markets and current products, but also for future products and future digital services. We think by rolling up your sleeves, getting dirty in your processes, and figuring out how you can leverage them more, you're going to identify opportunities for future products and services. Now I'd like to turn the dais over to Scott Opitz, who's going to tell us a lot about timeline analysis and about his organization.
So thanks, Jim, and good morning, everybody. I think it's pretty clear from Jim's presentation, particularly his bias towards business process and analytics. Now, business processes really are at the heart of many of the targeted areas for digital transformation, and aligning those processes with your transformation efforts is really key to realizing the full potential of those investments. At Timeline PI, we're obsessed with helping organizations understand their business processes and, frankly, to provide an express pass, or on the East Coast here, a fast pass, if you will, on getting onto those on-ramps that Jim mentioned. We do this with a new approach to process intelligence that we call timeline analysis, and in a few minutes, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague who'll take you through a quick introduction of how that can be applied to these types of challenges. So if we think about processes, and as we all instinctively know from our respective industries, processes are everywhere, right? They're really the digital nervous system, if you will, of how we run our organizations. As we saw in Jim's examples, whether the goal is to develop a new business opportunity or improve that customer loyalty that are referred to, or to drive operational efficiency, you must address the underlying processes as part of those efforts. Now, processes can be really specific to a particular market, based on, the unique demands of transacting business in a particular industry, and they can also be very generalized and very cross-industry. And so as we can see in these examples, right, the specialized things that might exist in healthcare or insurance or life sciences and so on, could be, again, very directed towards a particular problem that has to be addressed in working with your customers and your trading partners within those particular industries. But in any large organization, we're dealing with a variety of very sort of cross-industry issues related to compliance or journey mapping, or the idea of monitoring how our employees are actually able to do their work and what we're doing to support them with their employee journey mapping, supply chain issues, sales process, and so on. So without a deep understanding of these processes, making any kind of significant strides in a digital transformation effort is going to be really quite limited. So the challenge with this, the problem that we have with this is that in order to make these improvements, right, you can't really improve what you don't understand. And so if we think about the tools that are available to us today, they just fall short in really trying to address the process, understanding that we really need to succeed. Business intelligence, it has no concept of process step. It's very good at analyzing point-in-time data, providing you a variety of ways of looking at data in a more conventional way. But when it comes to temporal analysis, understanding how things are changing over time in a process, it's just not designed to do that. BPM technologies, on the other hand, are great if, in fact, they have control over steps of a process, but rarely do all of the steps of our process fall under the control of a single BPM platform. Process mining technologies, while interesting in this area, are frankly, in most cases, glorified visualization tools that show us a basic idea or basic understanding of how different steps in a process flow, but they don't really let us dive in and really investigate and optimize, different aspects of that process flow itself. And so what we're left with in many cases are manual approaches, which candidly are, very code intensive, very time consuming, and expensive to exercise. And even in the case where we may have, a more consultative approach to try to do that discovery, unfortunately, it's error prone because it's driven by things like customer interviews and time and motion studies, which unfortunately have inherent bias. So the bottom line is the current tools can't really deliver the insight that we need. So the trick to achieving true process intelligence, this true insight into what's going on, is this new approach that we call timeline analysis. And so it's an approach based on the idea of analyzing your data in a new way to provide a deep insight or understanding of the business processes that underlie everything that you do. And importantly here, this includes any kind of process. So whether it's the well-behaved process that's following a specific set of steps in a nicely consistent manner, or more of a case management environment where the sequence of steps may seem to be much more ad hoc and certainly highly variable because they're driven by empowering our employees to make the decisions about what makes most sense to do next. You have to be able to deal with those processes on both of those extremes of that continuum if you're really going to understand how things are working in your organization. So the result of timeline analysis is to give you a new way to analyze, optimize, and monitor any kind of business process and do it in a way which is completely complementary to whatever you're doing in BPM, other workflow tools, RPA tools, business intelligence tools, packaged applications, or any other technologies that you have in place. So how does it work? And I'm going to turn it over to Alex here in a moment. He's going to actually give you an example of this. But timeline analysis is really based on a three-phase approach. The first idea of discovering what's going on in your processes, then giving you the ability to dive in and analyze them, and then once you maybe affect some changes in your process to optimize them or improve the overall execution, is the ability to monitor to make sure that they're behaving the way that they're supposed to. In the discovery phase, right, it's all about baselining. How are things working today? What are the variations and how we might execute something? Are there any schemas that would describe the general flow of how we do things? And what kind of consistency do we have in how we execute from one process instance to the next? As we transition to more of the optimization phase, we drive in with more analysis to basically understand and ask questions about what type of hidden patterns might exist or dark processes might exist by using things like process query capabilities to be able to do very sophisticated analysis of how timing and performance may vary from one process instance or collection of process instances to another cohort. And then even diving in to look at how the human element comes into play in how we actually are executing more complex workflows. And then finally, when I can take advantage of all of this information and affect a change that I think will in fact improve my efficiency, is the ability to actually ensure that we're complying with what we have identified as the better way of doing our jobs. And so the ability to do compliance monitoring, actually provide, as Jim said, we live in a real-time world today, right? So the ability to provide real-time alerting to be able to tell me when something is happening as it's happening so that I can go and take an action on it before it's too late. And then to cross over and provide ongoing information sharing with the other parts of my team who may not be doing this analysis but might be the actual line operations people managing these processes via things like operational dashboards. So with that, I want to stop there and turn it over to my colleague, Alex Steibler. Alex is going to take you through an example of how the technology can be used in kind of a quick overview of some of the key features of the product to show you how you could use it in a real-world situation. So, Alex, over to you.
Thanks for that, Scott. So today we're going to be going through an example that is specific to tracking the life cycle of an insurance claim as it is processed throughout an insurance provider organization, specifically property and casualty insurance, and a tracking of a vehicle claim. So that's the use case we're going to be going through, and this demonstration we're going to be mimicking getting started creating a timeline PI project from scratch. So we can see exactly how simple it is to get started with this process intelligence tool. So I'm going to start by pointing out to a file that's got some events related to these claims processing, right? Some actions that were taken on these claims. And what it's done is introspected the file and brought back a subset of the data so that I can map some fields to tell the tool exactly what we want to use for our analysis. Okay, so the key here is that there are only 3 fields that are required in order to get going. Now the first one that we're going to want is a timestamp. That's going to tell us simply when any one of these given events or actions happened. The next one is going to be our timeline ID, which is this identifier is going to allow us to join together all the different events that are going to happen in a given claim instance into the same context. So for this example, we'd be using something like a claim number or a claim ID, but it could be a policy ID or a customer ID, any type of unique identifier which signifies what we're looking to track and measure. Now the last required field we'll want to have is our event name. This is simply going to tell us what work happened at that step. We had a first notice of loss submittal, we assigned an adjuster to the claim, started a review, so on and so forth. So those are the only 3 required fields that we'll want. Lastly, we can also bring in additional fields which we will consider dimensions or attributes of these claims, ways that we want to slice and dice, filter, break down the data by. So for this example, things like the adjuster, what state was it in, the type of policy, claim amount, so on and so forth. Okay. Now it's worth mentioning here that this is a relatively simplistic example of me manually pointing out to a file and loading it into the tool. We have a much more automated way of getting data into the tool. We can also assemble these claim timelines from multiple systems of record. So different events are going to come from totally separate sources. As long as they contain a shared object identifier, this claim number in this instance, we'll be able to connect them together and insert the events into the correct corresponding timelines. So what we've done is map some columns in this file. What I would do is simply hit upload and allow the tool to begin reconstituting the process based on these events. Now, I'm not going to waste our time doing that today, but if I had loaded this data, it would have taken about 90 seconds to load what we have here, which is more than 500,000 events related to these claims. Okay. Now, once we've successfully got our data loaded, we're initially presented with the overview page, which you can see includes quite a few metrics that are going to give us a better understanding of this project and our claims process as a whole. The first thing I'll point your attention to here in the middle, almost 550,000 events were loaded out of that file and have been mapped into roughly 31,600 timelines, or in this case, a timeline is going to be synonymous with a claim. Now we've pulled out 31 different types of events that could have occurred, and if I pop that up, I'll give you a full list. Here's the full list, all the different possible events that are occurring as a part of this process. I could sort them by here's the most commonly occurring event, or those events occurring in the most amount of timelines or claims. Just in the interest of full disclosure, I mentioned getting started from scratch. The only configuration that I've done apart from taking that 90 seconds to load the data is assigning a couple of icons to be used here for some of these critical workflow items as opposed to the default circle with the number in it. You'll see where this becomes more apparent and just visually represent these critical touch points when we get into the timelines view. Now, everything else automatically done by the tool. Some of the other metrics we've got, the average and range of duration for these claims. So on average, it takes us 23 days to process a claim, but it could take anywhere from 6 hours to 15 months. The number of events in our claims, along with we've got the ability to calculate some cost metrics. So for this 31,596 claim population, it's cost us $4 million to process those with an average cost per claim of $123. And we'll drill a bit further in on this in a moment. Now the last metric to mention is our distribution of the first and last events in this claims process. Which events are most commonly both starting and finishing this process. And if you click this and bring it up, you get a full list. Here are all the events which have closed out our claims process and a frequency breakdown of all of those for you. So from here, we'll move into the timelines view. We'll look at the actual process paths that the tool has generated for us. Now, each one of these horizontal lines with the circles on them represents a separate claim, and each one of the circles with the icons that I mentioned earlier represent an event or a step that occurred along that claims processing. Now if I scroll this to the right, you'll see the length is actually proportionate to the elapsed time. So of course some are going to span what looks like far longer than others, and you can even see some clear gaps, some empty space in between these events where essentially nothing is happening and these claims are waiting for processing. Now if I click on any one of these, it's going to give me much more details to what's happened with this claim, in what order, and at what time. So this is showing me details specific to timeline or claim number X, essentially. Now this column all the way to the left is the superset. Here are all the events which have occurred as a part of this claims life cycle from the start, the first notice of loss, all the way through to eventually this claim looks like was closed out. And we have associated time gaps. We also have that attribute related data available to us here. Who was associated with it, where did it come from, what was the value, and so on. Now these columns to the right, The tool is automatically figured out by analyzing specific patterns in this data, which events or actions are most commonly done together or as mutually exclusive steps. So it's essentially pulled out those sub or parallel processes, and you can see those things color-coded and grouped out here together. So I'll run through a quick example. You'd imagine every claim is going to have a first notice of loss, a coverage confirmation, probably an adjuster assigned on it. But if we're talking about vehicle claims, not every claim is going to have an injury claim associated with it, or a rental car issued perhaps, or a total loss with corresponding salvage information. And so you can see those types of events broken out and grouped together as the sub-processes of this overall claims process. All right. So this view as a whole, if you think about loading data across multiple systems, what we're essentially doing is piecing together the composite life cycle of this claim throughout the entire workflow or process, regardless of the system of record that's going to be responsible for recording any given event. Now, it's worth mentioning the engine itself, this tool, Timeline PI, doesn't know the first thing about insurance or claims processing. We could just as easily be running this analysis with underwriting, sales, invoice processing, patient flow. It's totally agnostic to the industry and the use case. The idea here is to give users very quickly a much better understanding of what's happening in the business process, regardless of the vertical that's being supported. So there's a huge amount of variability in this process. Both Jim and Scott mentioned kind of the case management world that we live in, right? Not everything, no two of these timelines or claims is going to be chronologically identical. So we're often asked, when starting an engagement, is there a way to give me a general feel for what's our most dominant path through this claims organization? This level of detail we can show is great, but I want to understand, at a high level, how are we most commonly completing our process? And it's a question that a lot of businesses will struggle to answer. I'll open up our schema editor and we'll create a new schema. This is going to give us the ability to map the most common path through the process in a visual manner. So we'll initialize a new schema, and we'll start by allowing the tool to take what it believes to be the most important milestone events. So when I click Select Default Milestones, what we're doing is, again, running advanced analysis, specifically choosing the events from this list which are most commonly and reliably occurring at the same point in the process. So it picked 10 events as milestones, and that's great. We can always customize this and add more to the model. So I'll include where claims are being denied, maybe where we're preparing estimates, and where our fraud checks are occurring. So we've added a few more, and I'll have it generate this schema for us. Now, here is that most common path or schema based on the events which I essentially said that I care about. Okay, and you can see how things track. Now, the nice thing here is this is not just a static Visio diagram. If I save this, it now becomes a monitoring tool. So you can see via the thickness of the line where more claims have made transitions versus others are more commonly followed paths. Or if I want to look at it not by the volume of claims, by the amount of time that's spent in between any two milestone events, I change the metric, and now I'm clearly representing where the bulk of the time is being spent in this claims processing operation. And I can start to, if the directive is to drive down the claim turnaround time, I can start to focus on these areas that have the longer average duration. Now, the last aspect I want to show here is the ability to animate this. So when I turn on this animation, the circles are going to represent a claim or a group of claims, and we can see as they progress through the workflow, as they are slowing down, starting to back up or bottleneck. You can see as they're changing colors, they're actually aging, and these are claims that have been in the process for a longer amount of time. And if anything stands out, I can then, for instance, this claim all the way up by coverage confirmed after 15 days, it looks like, I can click on it and get details specifically what happened with that claim. But the idea here is you can very visually and quickly uncover where are bottlenecks occurring, where are things slowing down or taking obtuse paths through our workflow, and be able to visualize that at a macro level using this schema tool. So from the schema tool, I want to move on to a form of analysis that introduces the variability. And something that may, if you're interested in Lean Six Sigma, continuous improvement, probably like this type of view of the data. This is showing us a frequency distribution of all of our process paths, all of our different completion behaviors, with the most commonly followed path here to the left. So along the top, we've got the number of timelines or claims which have gone any one of these different paths relative to the events that we've got along the left. So very clearly, this is going to point out where we're skipping steps, going back to complete steps, maybe doing things repetitively or pinballing back and forth in between events or actions. And as I scroll to the right, you're going to see more and more interesting and obscure ways of completing this process. Now, we can also get a look at, from a timing perspective, how efficiently we're processing these claims. So not only is it compliance, are we doing things in order, is everything being completed, but how quickly are these things happening? So our straight through, as it were, process where we're following what looks to be all the expected workflows is only done 5.4% of the time, and it takes us on average 17 days. And if I compare it down the line, you'll see, this looks like the most optimal way of completing this process. And now that I know that, and I know it's by far the quickest way of doing it, I want to push people towards this set of behaviors. Okay, so we can do comparisons by timing and duration, or we can do it even by cost. So I can get an idea of exactly how costly it is on average for us to complete one set of steps versus another, and on down the line. Right? Exactly how costly is it? So now we not only have compliance and timing, but we have bottom line. Right? How expensive is it for us to complete this set of steps versus another, and do comparative analysis? And when something stands out, for example, this $208 path, I can select this set of behaviors, apply it as a filter. Now when I go back to my timelines view that we initially saw, now I'm only looking at those 1,196 high-cost claims, and I can start to drill further in and start to understand a little bit more about where and why and when these are happening. Look for root cause. So that's a quick look at our discovery, a few of the discovery modules. I'm going to move on to our analysis and bring in our query mechanism. And this is a really powerful tool and something that really sets us apart from some of the BI and process mining tools that you may be familiar with. A traditional BI search is going to look for an object by using its current attributes. But what if we need to search for things from more of a pattern-based or a historical perspective? So I'll just pose a scenario. If somebody were to ask this question, in this claims process, how often do we have rental cars being issued on claims that have no record of a coverage confirmation ever happening, and then subsequently the claims denied after we've already incurred the cost of that rental car? It seems like logically it probably shouldn't be happening, but by using only a BI search, you're really not going to be able to answer that type of question. Okay, so let's just show you how we build that out. I've got what I expect to be a coverage confirmation, which is followed by a rental car being issued on the claim, and then subsequently the claim comes back as being denied. But in this scenario, what we're saying is we missed coverage confirmation, so that has yet to happen. However, we've issued a rental car and the claim was denied. Quite simply, is this happening? Right? I just want to test this hypothesis. I search it, and very quickly I get a response that, yeah, you know what, in 91 claims, that actual scenario occurred. Right? Now, and the beauty of these claims is they don't need to be that trivial. I'll add just a bit more to this, and we'll say, once the claim denial notice was sent, thankfully our customer, claimant, decided to return the rental car, which is great. But let's say we're only interested in those scenarios where they waited, they took their time. So let's say longer than 4 days after we sent that denial notice, they finally decided to bring the car back, which would of course in turn drive up the cost of the claim to our organization. Okay, so you can build in time here very granularly into any of these queries to start to get a better feel for things like SLA or just timing-based efficiency. And we could also even add to say, I only want to look at claims that have more than 2 rental cars issued on them, so repetitions, or we can get very specific with any of the attributes that we've got. But anyhow, we've added a bit more to this query. Let's go off and we want to see if this is actually occurring. And our search, again, a very quick result. In 44 of those claims, our claimants decided to take their time bringing our car back in these non-compliant claims. Okay. Now, that type of a question would be extremely difficult to get an answer to, or at least a timely answer to, using most other tools. In my experience, it's going to take quite a bit of code to even start to surface that data. Now, the ability to go off and explore these, test the hypothesis is great. One of the other aspects of these queries is that they can be set up to drive alerting. So that's the monitoring part of this. I don't need to be sitting and babysitting this data all day long. I'll trigger off alerts to fire off when conditions are met, and we're going to make sure people are going to be made aware prior to us issuing rental cars on unconfirmed claims, for example, that these cases are occurring, right? Build that accountability into the process. So I'm running short on time. I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions. The last analysis tool I want to show is our protocol mechanism. So as we get into more specialized forms of asking questions, we'll look at the protocol analysis. Now, in comparison to a query, if you think about that query, it says, it's a search mechanism. It says, go off and give me all the cases that match the condition that I just created, that I want to search for. What a protocol does is allow us to define a set of rules which we believe should always be followed. And instead is going to show us the timelines that violate that rule. Right? So if we're following protocol, I'm not concerned. That's what we expect. I want to see the things that are not. So in other words, it's going to be the inverse of that query. The query shows us what matches. The timelines are going to show us those that don't match the rule that we expect should be followed. So what we're looking at is a simple salvage protocol, but this is critical. When a vehicle is confirmed as a total loss, we want to make sure that it's salvaged in a timely manner, because each day that it's sitting on the lot, it's essentially a depreciating asset. Now this protocol says that once we've prepared an estimate and it's been approved and we've confirmed it as a total loss, I want to make sure within 10 days that vehicle has been recorded as salvaged, because the longer it's sitting, the less I'm essentially going to get for it. Now these are the critical conditions that we expect have been built into our process. We want to make sure they're being followed. And the nice thing here is, just like with a query, this is going to be saved and run as an alert to let us know anytime the protocol was violated. So I might have an alert set up at 7 days and then again at 8 and 9 days to make sure we're not going to breach this unacceptable threshold. As opposed to only looking at new data being loaded into the system, we can also use this protocol mechanism for analysis on our historical data. So if I click this show violations, here are all the various ways that this protocol was violated along with the root cause. So not just, hey, your protocol was violated, that can be helpful, but there are many different possible ways that this could be violated, and some may be more critical than others. So for instance, we've got estimate approved happening in the wrong position, something missing altogether, a time violation, right? So this allows us to get a bit more pointed as to what went wrong. And if any of these you would be considered to be a false positive, that's one big consideration. We don't want to flood somebody with false positives. I can very quickly and easily hide them from view, hone in on the exact piece or protocol violation that occurred, and maybe even apply that as a filter. And now when I go back to my timelines, I have the ability to hone through these 1,132 claims that have won this path. And one thing that I overlooked that I do want to show is the ability to run this to ground and actually look for root cause. So now that we're looking at a subset of our claims that have violated our protocol, I want to see where and when these occurred using our breakdown mechanism. Okay, so this is going to show me using those attributes in the data. Is there anything that stands out as to where I need to start to focus my efforts, right? And we're breaking it down by state here. Nothing too interesting using the state breakdown. How about the different agents that were assigned to the claim? Anything interesting there? And you know what, actually there is. Carrie Ann McDonough, it looks like, was responsible for a large percentage, 41% of those 1,132 non-compliant claims. Now I know who I want to go have a conversation with if I want to fix this issue from happening going forward. I'll start with Carrie Ann, start to understand if it's something training, if it's procedural, however we can help to ensure that this doesn't happen on a go-forward basis. So I will stop there because I want to leave at least 5 minutes for questions. So Monique, back to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Alex. I do see we have a couple of questions come in. We are hearing more around temporal analysis as a way to improve decision making. Where does temporal analysis fit in with digital on-ramps?
Yeah, this is Jim Sinur. Well, it's one of the analytical on-ramps. It just happens to be one way of looking at things. I mean, temporal basically says on a timeline, this exists for a short period of time and then disappears. So, you know, time stamping and temporal are important, you know, algorithms of the many algorithms you could apply to something. Scott, you might want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, and I think that, you know, given what we see with processes, I mean, one of the things in particularly we find, and I think this is the downfall of trying to use traditional like BI tools to do this type of analysis is, you know, a lot of data sets and a lot of data sources typically reflect the current state of something, and they don't include a lot of the historical aspect of it, right? So it's not until you actually look at the sequencing of how something arrived to its current state, and you know, we're able to sort of discern from that what actually maybe a root cause to a certain adverse behavior is, or that sort of thing. I mean, it's all temporal, right? If that sequencing is critical, because it you know, the downstream impacts of earlier steps could be quite significant.
Okay, we are doing both BPM and RPA projects. Where does this fit in with those products?
Well, let me take a shot at that. You know, RPA is generally about automating some of the steps that were either manual or crossing systems. So a key part of RPA is to add automation and remove people. When you're analyzing things that are happening on a timeline basis, you know, you could be automating things that shouldn't be automated. That's one aspect. The other is you might identify candidates for automation when you take a look at things that are occurring as exceptions. You may want to add some rules. You may want to add some constraints. And you may want to add some automation to make sure that they work well together. RPA and BPM do work quite well together. In fact, one of our predictions for 2018 is that they are going to work much more intimately. You're going to see partnerships initially, and maybe even some acquisitions. So adding analytics on top of that combo, I think, is very helpful. Scott, do you have any additional comments?
Yeah, I think I would look at it maybe a little more sort of functionally. So I think where we're seeing a lot of activity related to, and I think this comment would apply equally to BPM as well as RPA, but there's just a tremendous fervor around RPA these days, so maybe getting more attention, is that the use of the timeline analysis and the process intelligence on the front side to basically do baselining and as Jim said, to be able to sort of, you know, identify the projects that would provide the greatest return or greatest opportunity for improvement, but to be able to, you know, show you your current state and be able to stack rank those opportunities for improvement. But then we also see the bookend on the other end, which is one of the challenges we see with the RPA vendors particularly, and as much as we did with the BPM vendors earlier on, and in some cases still do, is the tools that are provided to allow you to monitor and analyze the actual performance of the bots once they've been deployed to make sure that the behavior is as expected, right? That it's actually delivering the results and the efficiencies compared to the previous state. That's extremely important, right? Otherwise, how do you know if, first of all, are they meeting the goals of what you've set, and then secondly, also there are no unintended consequences of, you know, causing a high efficiency of a bot in one area could cause a downstream unintended consequence of causing a log jam somewhere later in the process, right, as a bottleneck. So, you know, in both ends of that spectrum, you know, we see certainly the process intelligence applicability.
Okay, thank you so much, Scott. I do see a couple of questions come in additionally, but at the top of the hour and in the interest of time, we will respond to those questions directly. At this time, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Jim, for presenting. Thank you, Scott, for your material, and also thank you, Alex, for your demos. I hope you found the session informative, and we look forward to following up with you in the next couple of days. Have a great day.